Hello and welcome to episode number 25 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney, and oh man, do we have a show and a half for you today. Please make sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news about future guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. Please rate the show on iTunes if you enjoy listening. It means a lot to me. And every time you either like the show on SoundCloud or give it a rating on iTunes, a puppy gets a hug from its owner. I don't make the rules here, just making sure you are in the know. Chel Squared is now on YouTube. Once again, search Chel Squared Podcast, and the show will be there if you prefer listening on that platform. As always, a ton to get into this week. We have two guests coming on Chel Squared tonight. Seattle finally has an NHL team. They have two junior teams, and now a third hockey team will be joining them. The official announcement came a couple of days ago, and the team will begin play in the 2021-22 season. A lot to get into there. With this announcement comes news that the Arizona Coyotes will be moving to the Central Division when Seattle's team starts playing. The first half of the show will be dedicated to the team playing hockey in the desert. We'll talk Coyotes expansion draft implications and a potential new rivalry going on. Arizona, by the way, has won 4 games in a row. They're now 13-11-2, good for 28 points. We'll talk their recent success and what their game plan is to battle their tough upcoming schedule in the next couple of games here. They play their next couple at home against Washington and San Jose. Then they head over to Boston to play the Bruins. And then they go up to Buffalo to play the up-and-coming Buffalo Sabres. Plus, how well Nick Schmaltz has been playing since coming over from the Chicago Blackhawks, and a whole lot more. Join me for the first half of the show's Coyotes writer for The Athletic, Cat Silverman. Catherine, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Take me through what your first thoughts were, first reactions to, one, Seattle finally officially getting a hockey team, and two, when you heard that the Coyotes were going to switch over from the Pacific to the Central, what were your first thoughts?
So, first, looking at Seattle, I mean, that's a fan base that's been dying for a team. I'm sure they're all thrilled to bits, and having covered one of the more non-traditional markets over the last couple of years, I moved to Arizona in 2015, so I've gotten to see, what it's like for fans who didn't grow up with an original six team and how excited they can be about having a team that represents them. So I'm thrilled for the Seattle fans. My parents live in Houston now, so I've been secretly hoping for a Houston expansion team instead, because that would make it easier, visit the grandparents, visit the parents. But no, for Seattle, I mean, this is great news. They have, like you said, they have a great junior hockey scene there. They have a really great potential rivalry with the Vancouver Canucks. They're, just right across the Canadian-American border there. So that gives them, a team that's close proximity, gives them a great rivalry, gives them, in Arizona, you see LA fans driving in droves. You see Coyotes fans driving out to LA. So having those close proximity fans that can come into your barn and really make for a fun electric experience, that's always fun. So I'm sure Vancouver and Seattle are both more than ready for this. In terms of the Central Division news, for the Coyotes, I hate it. I know that, there are some Pacific Division teams that, looking at how the Coyotes are up and coming right now, they're about to enter their playoff window with their current roster. I know that those Pacific Division teams are probably loving it. The Central Division objectively is a harder division in terms of performance, in terms of team strength. So obviously for the Coyotes, that's bad news. It makes it that much harder for them to secure a playoff spot, makes it that much harder for them to secure home ice advantage if they are a guaranteed playoff team. You have more teams to battle through to get those coveted 1 and 2 spots. But it should be fun. I mean, Blackhawks fans, for a team that's so far away distance-wise, Blackhawks fans and Coyotes fans hate each other. So that should be a lot of fun to watch more frequently throughout the season. Right now, we really only see it 3 times a year.
For sure. There was an article published by the Seattle Times a couple of days ago that talked about, can the two junior teams in the state of Washington, can they coexist with the NHL team that will be coming in a couple of years here? What do you think about that? I mean, obviously, the more hockey, especially now with the NHL franchise going to be in that state, what do you think about that? And in terms of, there's 2 junior teams in Seattle, now there's going to be an NHL team in Seattle. Can all 3 of them coexist in that state, do you think?
Absolutely. I think that type of argument comes from a football mindset, particularly college football and pro football. because it's very hard. I mean, you look at pro sports teams in Georgia, and you look at how they struggle with attendance, largely because of UGA football. You don't really get that with hockey. What you're going to get, I think, is it's only going to make it better for those two junior teams. You know, it makes it so easy from a resource standpoint. Hockey's obviously a very resource-heavy sport. You really can't play it without financial resources. You can't play it without upkeep on rinks. You can't play it without equipment. You really can't get low-income kids playing unless you have financial backers helping you get that equipment on the streets, helping get it into kids' hands and, you know, onto their feet, the skates. So really it can only help in terms of the youth hockey scene, because you're bringing in what's going to be a multi-million-dollar franchise. And the junior teams can help in terms of getting eyeballs on the sport, but they really can't help from a financial standpoint. So you're obviously going to get improved development programs. You're going to get improved youth teams below the junior level, your Adams, your midgets. You know, you're going to get a lot of resources pouring in that are going to bring in younger players. And that can only help the junior programs, because even though the WHL, like, you know, you move from city to city. A lot of those kids don't play in the city that they grew up in, but they like to. A lot of kids like playing close to home. You like playing near your parents. The parents love it. So the more kids are coming from that area, from junior programs, the more are going to be able to play in the WHL and in the USHL in that area. And, you know, it's only going to make it better from that standpoint. And it could make it easier resource-wise to eventually get a college hockey team there. You know, that's right now in the continental U.S., not looking at Alaska, ASU is the farthest program to the west. And that's obviously here in Phoenix. So having, you know, the resources and the presence and the youth hockey presence in Washington increase with the introduction of an NHL team could help introduce an NCAA program in the future.
That's a great point, for sure. And by the way, Syracuse, where I'm at right now, does not have an NCAA program. So if that same person that willing to donate to a Washington school is willing to donate to a Syracuse school, we here would very much appreciate it. So the Vegas Golden Knights are exempt from the expansion draft that's going to be in a few years. The only contracts that Arizona has, players that are still signed post 2021-22, are Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Jacob Chychrun. Everybody else is either going to be a UFA that year or their contract is going to be expired prior to that season. So in terms of expansion draft, is this a scary time for the Coyotes because they have a lot of young guys, a lot of young talent that they have in the arsenal right now? But for the expansion draft, they could see one or two of those guys go. So what are your thoughts about the expansion draft in terms of the Coyotes and how they will figure all of this out?
So, like you said, there are only two guys that are currently signed. A lot of that is because, there are three. Christian Dvorak's also going to be signed through that point.
That's right.
He's just currently, he's on long-term injured reserve, so
that's right.
I almost forgot about him too. But, you know, that's a lot of the reason that they won't have many guys signed looking at their current roster is because they do have so many of those new guys that they're still feeling out. They've locked up guys that they're confident in, that they already know. You know, they're ready on those contracts. A lot of the others, they're waiting, and, you know, they still need to wait and see. They need to see what Clayton Keller is going to be worth. They need to see what, you know, Nick Schmaltz is going to get on his new extension. I think there's no doubt that he's going to get something long-term. He's going to be, I think, a guaranteed protection there, but, you know, we're not sure. There's a lot of aging transition looking at their blue line. We don't know if Jason Demers will be someone that you want to protect or if he's, you know, an asset that you can expose. Nick Hjalmarsson, I believe, is going to be signed through that point as well, but he's going to be an aging guy. You don't know if you want to have him necessarily on your team at that age, because that's a few years away. You could expose him as well, and he's a valuable piece from a veteran standpoint. So I think they have a lot of options in terms of who they can potentially expose and who they can entice Seattle with. I think their biggest concern is actually going to be in net. You know, if Antti Ranta manages to get healthy again this year, if we see him continue to perform well when he's healthy next year, I think that he and Aiden Hill are going to make a very formidable tandem for the Coyotes moving forward. And from that perspective, you know, that's almost the Marc-Andre Fleury, Matt Murray situation. You have two guys that are very good. One's more experienced. One's going to be a little bit newer at that point. And you have to decide, do you give one of these two up? Do you potentially make a deal with one of your first-round picks to have them take someone else? It's a tough situation for them, but I think that's going to be what they're looking to address more than anything else, is making sure that they don't lose a top-end goaltending talent, because for right now, I think that that's their most valuable asset, is that they have multiple goaltenders that can win them games as their players are transitioning.
So let's talk about the Arizona goaltending. Antti Raanta, of course, has been battling injuries in and out of the lineup so far this season. Darcy Kemper's on IR, and you picked up Calvin Pickard a few days ago, and you have 22-year-old Adin Hill, who was a third-round pick in the 2015 draft, who is playing out of his mind right now. He played a couple of games last year, didn't have the best results, and now he's back up with the big club right now. He's 4-0, .977 save percentage this season. He only gives up half a goal per game about. What have you seen from this goaltending so far? Because, again, Ranta's been out, Darcy's out. You have this 22-year-old who only got drafted 3 years ago, and as we've seen, goaltenders take a little longer to develop and to be the best that they can be. So for a 22-year-old goaltender to step in and play the way that he's shown to play, at least on paper, I'm sure you know Adin Hill better than I do, but what have you seen out of this young goaltender that suggests he's not only good short-term, but he can step up big time long term?
So when he first came in with the Coyotes, I talked to him at their training camp. I want to say it was 3 summers ago, so about 2.5 years ago at this point. And, just trying to get a feel for him, said, I'm not going to write a story on you right now, but I want to look at, writing about you more as the year goes on. What do you think is the best part of your game, and what do you think you need to work on, just so we have a better feel? And he said that the best part of his game was his reflexes, and the part that he wanted to work on was everything else. He was like, I'm not that great yet, everything else needs work. And since then, I try and go down to Tucson a couple times a year just to check up, see how he's been performing, watch a couple of his games, talk to him. Each year he has something that he's been confident enough in his improvement to say, this has improved. This is no longer an area of concern for me. And his tracking has improved. His depth management has improved. His skating has improved. His stick handling is something that he's still working on a little bit, but that's improved. This year, really, the thing that he identified to me he still needs to work on is his rebound control. And we've seen it a little bit, in his games with the Coyotes. He hasn't been perfect, but that's something that the fact that he's able to identify what goes right with his game and what still needs work, really, I think is what's making him so successful right now. He's not overly confident. He's not saying I'm an NHL goaltender and I'm perfect, but he's confident in what he's good at. And he's aware of what he's not. So he's constantly addressing that. He's constantly thinking about, okay, this is going to be this kind of situation. I play this well or I don't. So I think that's really what's helping him along here. And he's still, he's still a work in progress. I think we're a couple years out from seeing just how good he can be. And I think we're potentially, if we have to see too many more games this year, we'll see him start to regress a little bit. We're not going to see a .977 save percentage over a full season. But I think he's got the right mindset to go with the talent. And that's, I think, really what's making him, an NHL performer right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about the offense here? The Coyotes have scored one of the fewest goals collectively in the entire league. Only the Kings and the Hurricanes have scored less goals. So in terms of an offensive perspective, what has to change or what has to improve for the Coyotes to get going here on the offense? Because they don't give up a whole ton of goals. They only give up 67 so far this season. So they have a +1 differential here. But again, they're still out of a playoff race right now, even though they've won the past 4 in a row. They sit 5th. They're 4 points out of a wild card spot behind Minnesota, who has 32 points. So in terms of the offense here, what has to spark this team to get going?
Instinctual confidence. This is a team that a lot of these guys are new. I covered the Coyotes 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but last year I was with the Blackhawks. And when I came back this year, I walked into the dressing room during training camp and realized that the only 2 players that I had known that had been on the team the last time I covered them 2 years ago were Brad Richardson and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. So this is a very new lineup for this team. And I don't think they're fully confident in their fluidity and their cohesion and their ability to instinctually pass and shoot when it comes to working together as a team. And that's something that eventually you just have to take that leap of faith, but it takes some adjusting. It takes some time getting used to. We see when a guy gets traded to a new team, he doesn't always immediately click. And so this is a full roster like that. So I think that's really what needs to happen. A couple of the guys are getting a little too hesitant. They're trying to make the perfect plays, and that's just not working for them right now. They need to just take some of the, just take shots that may not be perfect, but are there. Hockey's a game of luck. They're eventually going to go in. But really, I think beyond that, I think they just need to not overthink it. They're doing the right things. Their possession's been good. They're obviously doing well defensively, so they don't need to be scoring. It's not like it's a 1-0, or it's not like it's a 5-1 loss for them. It's a 1-0 loss. So I really just think that they need to keep doing what they're doing and relax a little bit, have a little bit more fun with it.
Mm-hmm. And talk to me a little bit about Nick Schmaltz. This is a 22-year-old guy coming from the Chicago Blackhawks, has 5 points in the 4 games that he's played in a Coyotes jersey. What have you seen out of this young guy?
Chemistry. Clayton Keller and Alex Galchenyuk have looked immediately like they're a line that's been playing together for a while. Like I said about the whole roster, these guys need to be able to instinctually pass to each other without looking and making sure the other guy's there. That line's been able to do it. We've seen Clayton Keller lighting up the score sheet. We've seen Schmaltz lighting up the score sheet. We haven't seen it as much from Galchenyuk yet, but what we have seen from him is he's creating the space for the other two. His spatial awareness on the ice with them as a line has been fantastic. He's been a big part of the reason that they've been able to score so much. And so as a line, I really think that's what we've been seeing from Schmaltz is just comfort. He looks confident. He looks comfortable. He looks like he knows where his line mates are going to be, what they're protecting him from, who's covering what guy, and he's able to play his game because of it. So
the Coyotes, of course, have won their past 4 games in a row, but they have a pretty tough upcoming schedule. As I've said, they play at home against Washington, then San Jose comes to town, and then they go to Boston, and then the Buffalo, who have been kind of streaking. They've won 10 in a row, then they've lost their last few. What is the biggest key for the Coyotes to win these couple of games at home? And not only to do that, because they've been pretty shaky on the road and also at home. They're .500 at home. They're 7-5-1 away from the rink. What do the Coyotes have to do to ensure that at least 3 of these next 4 games here result in 2 points for them?
I think they need to, when it comes to the teams that aren't doing as well, that would be San Jose. It's been having some trouble, particularly with goaltending. We've been seeing some struggles from Buffalo over their last couple of games. I really think that they need to not play down. If their opponents look tired, they need to continue pushing. And we've seen them play poorly. When the Boston Bruins came to town, that was, I believe, a back-to-back for Boston. They had their backup in net. They should have been tired. They were without Patrice Bergeron. They didn't have Kevin Miller, Charlie McAvoy, Zdeno Chara, or Brandon Carlo. They were missing half their blue line, and Arizona just absolutely crapped the bed. They looked low energy. They looked discombobulated. They looked like they were the team that was more injured of the two, and they need to make sure that they don't do that. If Boston has players out of their lineup, they need to play like they're at full strength. If San Jose is having trouble with their goaltending, they need to not relax on their defense. And that's tough. It can be hard when a team's playing a sloppy game across from you to keep your game looking clean. Sometimes people play down to their opponents just like they play up to harder opponents. But they need to make sure that they don't do that. They need to make sure that they do kind of what they did against St. Louis a couple games ago. The Blues looked incredibly poor. They were having a really tough time of it, and Arizona didn't let that get to them. They went for it. And I think that's what they need to do against this group of teams coming up here.
Are the Coyotes a playoff team right now, or do you think they are better capable of going into a playoff run next year or 2 years from now?
I think they're more capable of a playoff run in the next year or two, but I think this year, as long as things don't go wrong, this is a team that should be competing for that wild card spot up to the end. I think that the Coyotes shouldn't be considered an eliminated team until probably March or April, early April, mid-March, something like that. If we're seeing them out of the playoffs before then, we need to take a close look at what went wrong, because really this is a team that should be right there in the thick of things up until the end.
For sure. And one last question before I let you go. So the poll question today was, what should Seattle's team be called? Of course, the expansion team. And the 4 choices were the Thunderbirds, the Kraken, the Supersonics, which I don't know if the NBA fans in Seattle would appreciate that, and the Space Needles, of course. This poll got almost 400 votes so far. But before I tell you which vote is in the lead right now, which of the 4, or if you have another team suggestion, what would be your team name if you were the owner of the Seattle team?
That's hard. I kind of like the Kraken, and I know that that's not what people want to hear. I know that that's it almost sounds like a joke, but I think it's kind of fun. So that's my vote. I'd like to see the Kraken.
The Kraken lead the vote right now in the polls at 47%. The Thunderbirds are leading in second place with 26%. Supersonics, which have 18% of the vote, and the Space Needles have 11% of the vote. And I had a couple of cool responses to the poll as well. Chandra Sports, Anthony Chandra, who I had last week on the show, said, anyone who doesn't choose Kraken is 100% a cop. Now, I don't know about that, but there's been a couple of other responses. A couple of people have said something related to music, because there's such a big music scene in Seattle. Either the grunge or the rock stars. At Richard Dicer said grunge. At Covey274 Hart said the Seattle rock stars. I mean, there's a lot of cool things that Seattle can do if they want to incorporate either some elements from their city, from their state, or if they want to go a little bit left field here, they can go Kraken. I don't know if the Thunderbirds would appreciate them taking their name, but I'm sure the team plays 3 years from now, so if they wanted to, they could probably work out a deal there. But there's a lot that Seattle can do.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a really culture-rich area, so I think whatever they end up choosing is going to be fun.
For sure. I mean, this is definitely a hockey market, right? You would assume, because one, they paid, what was it, like $650 million to officially be an expansion team. If you put that much money into anything, I'm assuming you want that thing to succeed. But Catherine, thank you so much for taking the time out. I really do appreciate you taking the time. And I'll talk to you again real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
For the second half of the show, writer for NHL to Seattle, EJ Michele joins us. EJ, live in Seattle. Take me through your emotions when the NHL finally announced that Seattle was getting a team.
It's funny. It almost didn't feel real, just because when you've been entrenched in it, like so many of us have here, following the whole thing, it wasn't exactly a surprise when the announcement came. But I think the really coolest part is they held an event downtown, and if you were there, you got to just kind of be around all of these people who you've been seeing around the Seattle hockey scene for anywhere from a couple months to years now. Some of these people have been so passionate about this project that it was really cool to kind of just get to experience that final moment with everyone. They put Gary Bettman up on the big TV. Nobody even booed.
That's a rare sight to see, for sure.
Yeah, it was weird.
So how long have you been a part of this push to get an NHL team to Seattle? Because the state already has 2 junior teams, but how long have you been involved in this process of, okay, the 2 junior teams are great, but let's get an NHL team into the state now?
So personally, not very long for me. I want to say about 12 months myself, getting a lot closer with John, who runs NHLtheseattle.com. He's fantastic. He's been doing it for almost 8 years now. So, I mean, his phone was just blowing up. Everyone had to come by and congratulate him. He just very grassroots got this thing going. And so he's got this amazing network of people. So I started probably within the last year or so getting more involved in, attending city council meetings, which is something I never did before this. It was a fascinating experience. Just seeing the different people who are involved, right? There's fans of teams from out of town. There's people who play beer league here. There's people whose kids play hockey and want more ice here. Like you get the sense of how much more it means than just being able to go downtown to see a game occasionally.
So I'm getting the sense that hockey is pretty big up there in the state of Washington.
Yeah, it's niche, but I don't think it's going to be too hard. I think people are going to be jumping on that bandwagon so quickly. Where the arena is right in the middle of downtown, surrounded by Amazon, Microsoft, Google. There's a lot of opportunity there for them to draw in new fans. And then the fans that are already here are just so passionate. I think when you are in a city like this where there's not really a team within the city limits. A lot of people don't know, but even the Seattle Thunderbirds play about 45 minutes north in Kent. When there's no team to go see, the hockey fans who are there tend to group together really tightly. It's the only people who will talk to each other out and about in Seattle. Complete strangers seem to be the hockey fans. If you find somebody, you're just like, I'm desperate to talk to somebody about this thing that I love.
That's awesome. So in your opinion, how does having an NHL team, how do you think it will impact the area, not only economically, but socially as well?
I think I would even call it a desperation here for another one of the big four sports. We have the baseball team. Which is awesome. But baseball tends to be more of a social event for most people. Everyone hits up a game or two in the summer. It doesn't have the same intensity as other sports. And then football, there are only 8 home games a year. So as invested as people are in the Seahawks, it's actually just a really limited viewing opportunity. I think being able to have 40 opportunities to go and see this team play in the heart of Seattle is going to be fantastic. I think it's going to be really you're going to see in the same way that we saw MLS grow here. We have a pretty passionate MLS contingent. I think the NHL contingent is going to blow up.
And what about economically? I mean, I'm sure obviously if you put a team anywhere, the city is gonna do pretty well economically for at least short term, but hopefully long term. But what do you see long term in Seattle in terms of, is there going to be an economic boom as the team comes into the area, or what do you think about the economic opportunities that Seattle will see in the next few years or so?
So honestly, this is certainly not my area of expertise, but I don't really foresee the team having a super huge direct impact on the growth of the city, because it's more that there's a team here because the city is growing. Seattle has such an influx with the big tech companies. Starbucks, Google, Amazon, Microsoft are all based here. And so we have a ton of people who move in from out of town with honestly disposable income, shall we say?
Right.
What I think it's going to have a big economic impact, I think, is the trickle down effect of people getting interested in the sport. The building of new rinks. They're putting in that 3-sheet practice facility. It's about 20 minutes north of downtown in an area called Northgate. They're putting that's just going to be the first of what we hope is a bunch of new ice sheets. And so I think it's just going to make it so much more accessible for the average person with kids to get their kids interested in the sport, to try it out, for adults to try it out as well. So I think it more from the only economic standpoint I can really put on it is how much more reasonable it's going to be for people to try hockey in the area and see hockey.
I talked about this earlier in the show, but I want your opinion on this as well. The Seattle Times put out an article yesterday asking if the 2 WHL teams in the state can coexist with the new NHL team. What do you think?
Oh, I don't think that's going to be a problem. I can't speak to Kent as much, but I'm a pretty avid Silvertips fan. So I'm up there a lot. And so many of the Kent fan base is local. Or sorry, the Everett fan base. Everett, again, is a solid 45 minutes north of the heart of Seattle. And it's a city in its own right. And they fill up that. It's pretty, it's not going to be filled to the rafters on a random Tuesday night, but Saturday night games never suffer. I mean, it is loud, and these people are locals who have season tickets to the Silvertips. And I don't really foresee those people dropping their Silvertips tickets. I think it's more of their very different experiences. I think you're going to see tons of people either having season tickets or going to one-off games downtown for the NHL team. But I still think that really loyal contingent who are season ticket holders of the junior teams, they're really proud of their little teams up there. And that whole culture, the Billet families are always there. It's a really cool experience that I honestly think there's a possibility that they actually see an increase in traffic as people realize how expensive going to NHL teams is. I wouldn't be surprised that if you have a couple of kids, you take them to an NHL game and they fall in love with it. Now they're like, when are we going to go see hockey again? My immediate response would be like, let's go to the Silvertips next time.
Well, let's say you're the owner of the Seattle franchise. Now, moment of truth, what would you call this team?
Oh, God. For me, I have a really unique and silly opinion and reason on this. I'm actually one of the very few people who is in love with either the name Sea Dogs or Sea Lions. One, okay. I think it would be pretty funny to have the Hawks and the Dogs in town, or the Hawks and the Lions between the two C teams. Mm-hmm. And also, I just think it would be really funny that whenever the other team took a penalty, the entire crowd barked like seals. I think that would be incredibly irritating and would be a really funny thing to have an entire arena doing. Give a good old art.
Well, I put up the poll question on Chel Squared. By the way, if you want to vote on the poll or if you want to tweet at the poll, it's on Twitter at Chel Squared. The poll question again is, what should Seattle's team be called? And the 4 choices were the Thunderbirds, the Kraken, the Supersonics, and the Space Needles. And I left some space for if you have your own name that you want to call the team, then tweet at the poll. And this poll is booming with votes right now. I've never gotten this many votes right now. It's over 660 votes. And
yeah, people are really obsessed with that team name. As somebody who writes about the hypothetical team in the future, who writes about at NHL2Seattle.com, let me tell you, we are honestly at a point where we would just be happy if they named the team, so we stopped getting that question.
The Thunderbirds currently have 26% of the vote. Now, I got someone quote tweeting me a few minutes ago. His name is Sam Voorhees. His at is slam yes ma'am. Interesting at. He said, if I see one more person suggest Thunderbirds, despite the pre-existing Seattle Thunderbirds, I'm going to scream hashtag NHL Seattle. Listen, Sam, there's nothing stopping this NHL franchise from meeting with the WHL team and say, hey, we love that name. Let's discuss a possibility of us taking that name from you, and then we could talk about a different name for the junior team instead. Nothing is preventing them from having that meeting. So,
I'm telling you guys, people are passionate about their junior teams down here. I don't think they're going to suffer too much. They are very passionate.
So, Sam, I appreciate you being very, very tight about this name, but it's also a name. Let's relax. So the Thunderbirds have 26% of the vote. The Kraken lead with 46% of the vote. The Supersonics, again, basketball fans probably not so happy about this name. I mean, again, there's nothing suggesting that this team will be called the Supersonics, but again, the Supersonics were a Seattle team. And one of the replies that I got to this poll as well is from at MJ Ruther, who said, what should their name be when they move to Oklahoma City? Oh.
Yeah, that was funny and mean. I saw that one. I did see that.
Oh man, that's a great reply. I can't say anything about that. And the other Space Needles is 4th with 11%. Honestly, I mean, I saw the quote-unquote leaked name of names that they've registered. I don't know how truthful that name is or what have you, but I mean, I didn't see Space Needles on there. I don't know. I thought of it, because you have the Space Needle in Seattle. To call it the Space Needles, I mean, why not? There's a couple people that said related to music. Again, the Seattle Grunge is a name that people
pretty popular.
People seem to like that name. At Joe Fabrazzo at Slappy 002. I don't know how he got that at, but you know what? I'll ask him. I'll tweet at him later and ask him that. But
you know what? They're only allowed to do that if they wear plaid jerseys.
Ooh. That is, you know what? We should barge into the rights holders of the Seattle team and say, okay, here's the deal. What you're gonna do is call this team the Grunge and then make them wear plaid jerseys. It would be
perfect.
We as a city, we as a state, have collectively wrote this petition. Every single person and dog have signed this petition, and we will not
they've
rest.
They've got to be flannel plaid sweaters. That's the only option for them.
Oh man, can you imagine if that actually happened? What would happen?
It'd be great. I would buy all of the jerseys. I would have everybody's jersey.
Oh man, I mean that if you don't like the NHL costs of tickets, oh boy, having what, like 20 jerseys would be kind of a lot.
Who has to eat? It's fine.
That's true. You know what? You could always sell one of them and get lunch. You always you always have tangible money on you, not practical money, but always tangible. You could always sell one of them.
People will know.
So from your recent tweets, I take it you're keeping a very close eye on the William Nylander situation. Now, he finally struck a deal and will be playing for the Leafs tonight, and my fantasy team thanks Nylander dearly. So his cap hit...
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. That's 100% why I have to be off this thing at 7.
That's fair. That's very fair. So his cap hit is very strange number, $10,277,778 this season. And then after this season, it will be pretty nice, if I do say so myself, a $6,962,366, a 10-team no-trade clause in the final year of his contract in 2023-24. Now, what were your initial thoughts when what seemed to be exactly 0.3 seconds before 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 1st, it was finally announced that William Nylander has signed and will be a Toronto Maple Leaf for the foreseeable future?
I think it was just extreme relief at that point. I love the deal. I'm a huge William Nylander fan. I think what he brings to the table is one of those things that's even a little still underrated within the league, that sort of transition play that he's so good at. So I was just really happy they got him signed. And then when you look at the deal, they were able to basically have best of both worlds in a unique situation. They got him his money, and I'm pro players getting what they should be paid. Mm-hmm. And the team's not going to super suffer for it in the years afterwards. It's going to be a really reasonable contract for a while.
What do you say to people that say, oh, he doesn't deserve that contract, he hasn't earned it yet, or he's this or he's that? What do you say to those people that don't like this contract for the Leafs?
Besides shut up?
Yeah, preferably.
Yeah, besides that. No, I think the thing is the guy has 2 about 60-point seasons. He's 22. He's not even reached his prime yet. And I don't think people realize how much the power play he was on was both the second unit and that it suffered last year. And now he's still probably going to be on power play 2 this year just because that top unit is so incredibly stacked in Toronto. But the thing is that's going to be his show. It's all going to run through him on that second unit. And he was incredibly effective his first year on the power play. It just seemed like a kind of weird downswing last year. So you wouldn't expect it to continue. And if you're sitting there and wondering if regression is going to happen, it's probably going to be in a positive direction for Nylander.
So sticking to the Leafs here, a couple of other trades happened this week that I want to get your take on. To make room for Nylander, the Leafs traded Josh Levo to the Canucks in exchange for minor leaguer Michael Carson. Levo is 25, will be an RFA at the end of the year. He had 6 points in 25 games with the Leafs this season, primarily pretty much playing low minutes, not having a whole lot of ice time. Levo already has a goal in the singular game he's played in the Canucks jersey. EJ, what do you think about this trade?
To be completely honest, I think it was a mercy trade. I don't think that it was necessarily even planned to be a slam dunk. There's no galaxy brain. The Leafs don't think Carson's going to be better than Levo even. I don't think that's what this is about. This is about the fact that the poor kid's been stuck in the system for about 5 years, been a dutiful soldier, and hasn't been able to get on the ice enough. This was his most games played season, and it's only December. He's been like absolute staple of the press box just because the Leafs are so stacked at forward, or they have expensive guys at forward, or whatever XYZ reason. It made more sense to either have him down in the minors when he was waiver eligible or in the press box when he wasn't anymore. He was probably going to get sad again. He was like, he's the 12th or 13th guy between him and Ennis. And he did deserve a better shot. And so I think it was really more of a person-based move than it was a asset management move. I think it was good they got something else back. I'm not against the Leafs stacking up the minors roster. They tend to like their guys down there, and that's been incredibly successful for them. But I'm just that's how I feel about it. I was happy for the guy. I mean, he gets to play next to Pettersson. That doesn't suck.
Right. That's not a bad thing. Well, I mean, if I were the Leafs, I mean, again, Levo doesn't have tremendous trade value, but they do need defensemen, and they did get it. So I mean,
but what kind of defenseman would you get for Levo? They have about 5 what you'd consider third pairing defensemen that are serviceable third pairing defensemen. And they don't really need a 6th third pairing defenseman. They need a guy who can play next to Riley. So
that's true. They need anyone that could play next to Riley that's better than a top 6 defenseman. Which, if you put Ron Hainsey there, it's not gonna end well for the Leafs.
To be fair, I think they already have the answer, and the answer is sitting on the left side of their third pairing. But we'll see how long it takes Mike Babcock to get there.
For sure. And
I'm a Dermot truther.
Oh well. The hot takes have arrived here on Chel Squared. Well, speaking of defensemen, the Ducks traded defenseman Marcus Pettersson to the Penguins for a promising prospect Daniel Sprong, a guy Pittsburgh, I mean, seemed to, I guess, give up on, even though, in my opinion, they didn't give him enough ice time or the extended leash he needed in order to really blossom as a player. Sprong, of course, scored that disgusting goal on Corey Crawford last night in his first game, second shift as an Anaheim Duck. So before he played, I picked him up in both of my fantasy teams. So slam dunk for now for Daniels. I drafted him initially. Then I dropped him like 3 weeks in because they weren't playing him. Then I picked him up again, and he got a couple of assists for me. Then I dropped him again. Someone else picked him up, and then they dropped him. And now I picked him up again because now he's on.
What ride have you put this boy on?
Well, now he has ice time. Now he's actually playing games. So now...
Hey, I did the same thing with Levo. I have him right now, too, so I get it.
Yeah, I mean, now he's on a team that will actually give him minutes. And what do you know? He's scoring. Galaxy brain, honestly.
Yep. Yep, I completely agree. And so I can't speak too much to Sprong himself other than I agree with what you said. I don't think he was given the shot, but I don't know enough about him or the defenseman he was traded for to really, really say much about it. But I just think it's a very good, it's a bad practice to trade guys before you've really seen what they're worth. Mm-hmm. I think NHL teams too often bring up their prospects, throw them on the fourth line, and then decide that's the thing that's not working. I think most of your prospects should at least, come in. If you have like a top tier, like forward prospect or whatever, you're like, this guy is supposed to produce. He was projected to produce. Don't stick him next to, Dom Moore on the fourth line or whatever it is. Put him up next to a guy can help him do that and will put him in the best position to succeed. And at the very worst, then you're pumping up his value to flip him, but you'll at least know what you have. You don't want to find out what he he is once he already moves on, you know?
So, I mean, he's a second-round draft pick just 3 years ago. He had 4 assists in the 16 games that he played with the Penguins before being traded. Again, he was playing garbage minutes. He was playing under 10 minutes in Pittsburgh for a lot of the time, and he wasn't seeing ice time. And in the minutes that he did see,
he was lighting it up in the AHL.
Yeah, he's a promising young guy, and if you get drafted 3 years ago and you have promise, and to play someone on the fourth line like they played Sprong, and then, think, oh, this isn't working, and Sprong is the problem. Well, no, not at all. Pettersson, another second-round pick, drafted 4 years ago. He had 6 assists in 22 games with the Ducks this season before being shipped to Pittsburgh. I mean, if I'm the Ducks, I don't know too much about Pettersson, Marcus Pettersson, so I don't want to be the expert on him, but if you trade for Daniel Sprong, I think you're the winner in this deal. Even if I haven't watched every second of Pettersson's game on the ice, knowing how good Sprong could potentially be, I think this is a great deal for Anaheim.
Yeah, I definitely take Anaheim's side on it, at least at this point. I mean, right, there's just something there with Sprong. Everyone seems to know it, but maybe I think I heard some whispers that maybe he wasn't the coach's favorite. And, if a coach won't play a guy, then there's no point in keeping him around.
No, it's tough. It's always tough when you have a good player. I mean, I've seen it firsthand as a Rangers fan last couple of years, when Alain Vigneault absolutely would never play Pavel Buchnevich. He refused to play him, and it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. This man would constantly play Tanner Glass over a promising young forward in Pavel Buchnevich, and when he did play him, he played in fourth line minutes, and he didn't really produce, and his confidence was shot. Well, gee, I wonder why this guy's confidence is in the trash can when you don't play him. I don't.
Yeah, there's a great quote. I'm not going to say it exactly right, but it's from Micah Blake McCurdy, Ineffective Math on Twitter, and he's like, it's the why do we play guys why do we punish young players for making mistakes on accident and then play play older players who make the same mistakes on purpose.
It's a perfect quote, and I totally agree with that. It's why are these young players, right? You put them on the NHL roster, right? So already they're not playing as confidently as they would be in the minors, right? Because these are young kids that these are either their first games or their first few tastes of how to play in the NHL. So not only are they already nervous, you're not helping by playing them 4 minutes a game and then benching them when they make a rookie mistake. You are not helping the cause, and that's crystal clear here in the case of Daniel Sprong. This is a very promising forward that I don't know how to else say this besides the fact that they kind of threw him to the curb here. They didn't play him enough, and then when he didn't turn into a 100-point scorer on the fourth line, well, gee, I wonder why, they traded him. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I don't think Pittsburgh's in any great position to be giving up potentially serviceable, cheap assets.
No, because
they've only got a couple of years where they still, they're not in a position to make mistakes, that's for sure. No, and they've traded a lot of their farm team and their draft picks for success. So to trade one of the better prospects that you still had, it's a head scratcher to say the least. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Again, Marcus Pettersson could be the next Brian Leetch. We don't know, right? But unless that happens, and Daniel Sprong turns into at least part of what the scouts and what Penguins fans thought he was going to be, then the Ducks win this trade. There's there's a very slim margin in which Pittsburgh wins this trade, but if things go according to plan, I think Anaheim takes this trade any day of the week. Yeah, I would if somebody offered me that trade. Right. For sure. Well, up in Seattle, right, you're going to have the Vancouver Canucks very close to home very soon in a couple of years here. How big do you think that rivalry is going to be? Because Vancouver is the closest NHL city that you have.
And now you have Seattle, insert name here. Could be the Kraken, could be the Sea Dogs, could be the Grunge here. No one knows. Could be and they could be wearing plaid jerseys. We don't know. And how how do you think this rivalry is going to play into growing the sport in the Washington area after they start playing?
I think it's going to depend on a couple of factors. Obviously, marketing. That's probably not something that most fans are talking about a bunch, but honestly, I think they've already kind of planted the seeds on that. And if the Canucks start to play along, then you can, create a bit of a rivalry there just based on what the teams are saying about each other and the hyping of the games and how they advertise for those games. I think that you will definitely see a huge bump in attendance from people down here when the Canucks come to town, just because it's the only team that most of them have seen. A lot of people down here have been like, oh, I went to a Canucks game, 5 years ago, but it's the one that they've been to, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be a thing for people. And then I think it's also always connected to the talents of the two teams. If the Canucks get their act together, it's going to be a lot less of a rivalry.
It's a tough call for Vancouver to do that.
Yeah, but let's say they get their act together and they're a competitive team. And no offense, I'm not super expecting Vegas to happen again here. Then it's
some trash talking from a fan base that doesn't even have a team yet. This is pretty good.
I just mean the numbers are not on the side of a recreation of that experience. Not that it won't be fun no matter what happens.
Right.
And I mean, I'm still interested to see the long-term effects of what happened in Vegas on their team. I think it's going to be it's amazing from their fan base perspective, from like growing their footprint there. But I wonder how much the on-ice product will suffer from those contracts that got given out in the wake of that. But on Vancouver, I really think if they have any similar talent base or even can, hang, I think it'll turn into a rivalry for sure. They're just so close and there's so much overlap between the two cities. I think it'll kind of run like California rivalries do. Mm. It'll be fun.
Well, what do you think about the Coyotes now? They are moving to the Central Division when the Seattle insert team name here start playing. What do you see in terms of an impact for the Coyotes? Because I talked to Catherine, who was on the show just prior to you. She's concerned in a way because the Coyotes are moving into a tougher division because this team is going to be playoff ready. If not this year, then maybe next year or the next 2 years. This is going to be a playoff team. So for the Coyotes to move to the Central Division, which is objectively a tougher division, at least for now, then it's going to be not great for the Coyotes. But what do you think about the Coyotes moving from the Pacific Division to the now tougher Central Division in 3 years?
So I definitely agree with everything Catherine said there. That was my gut response to hearing that they were moving. I was like, oof, that's no fun. I do think it's a more difficult division. Not as much as we thought, I think, at the beginning going into this season. There was so much hype around the Central. And then we've had a couple of teams sort of fall off. St. Louis, Chicago have been really underwhelming this year. But it's still better than the Pacific, where I think even this year the Coyotes have a chance of squeaking in just because the division is really not that great. It's a really weak division. I think that third spot, I would not be surprised if the third seed in the Pacific had fewer points than the first wild card spot. That wouldn't surprise me. Mm-hmm. And so obviously you lose that advantage when you move into that division. Now you're fighting for the wild card spots instead of the third Pacific seed. But so much can change so quickly. Rises and falls. Whether or not St. Louis, this is a fluke for them, because it really feels like they should be better. Right. Chicago, I think, is definitely never going to be what they were. But alternatively, there are a couple of very, very famous teams and very well-attended teams in the Central.
Name names.
I mean, no, Chicago, Nashville, St. Louis actually has a very passionate contingent. Mm-hmm. Dallas does well for itself. And then they're going to be playing earlier, which means they'll get more screen time from the East Coast.
Right.
So I don't think that would be bad for a team like the Coyotes to get just a little bit more airtime earlier, and then, have fans of those teams instead of Chicago coming down once or twice a year. They definitely come down twice a year, and then there are, fans of that team who will attend their events, their games, and fill those seats.
Mm-hmm.
So that's never bad.
Okay, for sure. Is there something about the Seattle area that we haven't talked about, whether it's you and I, whether it's the writers, the broadcasters? Is there something about the Seattle area, the Seattle team, that isn't being mentioned that you think is big, to a big topic to talk about, to discuss here? I mean, because you live in the area, you know it obviously a lot better than I do. I'm on the opposite end of America right now. So I mean, I've never been past Pennsylvania in terms of West Coast, so I don't know anything about anything past that point. So what is there something about the area or the team or the hockey culture or something unique about Seattle and Washington State itself that people just aren't talking about but you think should be talked about?
That's hard off the bat. The one big thing. So I think one thing that people don't realize, how to put this, like Seattle, I'm interested to see how they handle it being a Seattle team versus a Washington team. Mm-hmm. Washington State is not a one city state, obviously. There are lots of other big cities, but it's one really big metro area. There's nothing that really comes close to the, business and culture of Seattle. Nobody, no big band is stopping in Spokane instead of Seattle. So I think what I'm fascinated to see is how they spread out the influence if this team becomes very owned by, say, Eastern Washington. I don't think people realize how large Eastern Washington is and how geographically different and demographically different it is than Western Washington. And then also out there, we have two more junior teams. We've got the Spokane Chiefs and the Tri-City Americans. And so they've got their own contingents. And that's also one reason I'm not super worried about the Silvertips and Thunderbirds surviving. If there are strong teams out in Spokane and Tri-Cities, there's a lot more of a junior hockey culture in this state than I think people realize. And I'm interested to see how sort of those all link up, right? If they make a big effort to connect all those communities and sort of turn us into a hockey state instead of a hockey city. So that's what I go. That's the angle that I think I'm most watching on with bated breath. Western Washington is so much more densely populated. It's just Seattle, and then you go out Everett, Kent, and then there's Tacoma, then Olympia. It's just all down the Sound. It's incredibly populated. So I'm interested to see how passionate and how far that passion spreads.
Do you think that the Seattle team is going to advertise in Oregon and Montana and Idaho just like Vegas did in neighboring states? Do you think that's going to be a possibility for more fans to get into the sport?
I do. I think they'll try. I think one thing that makes it a little more difficult for Seattle to do that than some other, than say Vegas. Vegas didn't have any pro sports really before that, right? That's their first big one. They're getting football, but so they didn't have any pre-existing rivalries. I think it's a little harder to cross market when you hate each other's football teams or you hate each other's soccer teams or whatever else it is. I think they're going to be limited in their cross marketing with, who there's not already rivalries with.
Well, I mean, I don't know many Idaho hockey fans here. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
But there's not a whole lot. I mean, that's an untapped potential in terms of market, in terms of people that might be interested in your sport. Also, Oregon, no real major team there is either. Yep. And yet, again, this is a whole state here that could thrive if you market properly.
Yeah, I think I'm super interested to see how far that spreads. And I think that marketing, that whole group that's getting ready to launch this team in the next few years is going to expand exponentially in the next year or so. And then we'll have a lot better idea of what they're going to do. They're a very small team right now. And now that they've got the official confirmation, I think we're going to start seeing a lot of really fun stuff in the next, couple of months.
Right. And not to hark over the Portland Trailblazers, which of course are a professional basketball team. However, in terms of hockey, there's a lot of California teams, and now you're going to get a Seattle team. But now, Oregon could get into hockey. You got Idaho, you got Montana, maybe even Wyoming. I mean, I don't know.
For sure.
I don't know how into Wyoming. I don't know how into hockey Wyoming could be, or vice versa. I don't know how into Wyoming hockey would be. But but there's definitely untapped potential for people to get acclimated into the sport and see it for the first time on their TV, see people walking around with hockey apparel, and to get into it themselves. There's neighboring states that don't have professional hockey teams, besides obviously Vancouver, but that's up in Canada. So there's a potential for even more fans to finally get involved in the sport.
Yeah, I think so. And especially just out west here, where the hockey territories are so much more thinly spread. There's definitely opportunity there, depending on how they decide they want to go at it. If they're going to go a very Seattle identity, or if they're really going to try and spread that and become a regional sensation.
Well, this was awesome, EJ. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me for a little bit. Go Sea Dogs. Am I right?
Go Sea Dogs.
Well, plug your social media. Tell people where they could follow you, where they can read your stuff. Where can the masses find EJ?
So I can be found on Twitter at Emily Jo Michele, Michelle with one L. I post everywhere that I write anything, I'll post it there. And then the other big thing to keep an eye on is, if you're more analytically inclined, the Hockey Analytics Conference that is normally held in Vancouver is actually going to be held in Seattle this year.
Wow.
And I am co-hosting that down here with John from NHL to Seattle and some of the Hockey Graphs folks. So if that's your thing, if you want to come in for a really cool weekend of nerdy hockey fun, keep an eye out on my Twitter feed, and I'll be posting a lot of information about it there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, EJ. I really appreciate you taking the time out. I'll talk to you again real soon.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. And that, of course, was another episode of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney. And next week, we got a big one. Next week is the 26th episode of Chel Squared. We've reached the half-year mark, and I'm very excited for that. And also, next week is the last episode I'm going to record at Syracuse University. After next week, I will officially be a graduate with a bachelor's degree in broadcasting and digital journalism from the Newhouse School, and I'm very, very excited for that. It's been a great three and a half years, and I'm ready to finally start my career. So I'm very excited for that. As always, I'm very thankful that you've listened in prior episodes in this episode, and I will talk to you again next week.